Hi, everybody! Today I'm going to bring a very important topic to your attention. I'll be discussing red tides, or formerly known as Carina brevis. So, did you know that those pretty waves that glow, the bioluminescent waves, actually cause up to $20 million in damage? Yeah, 20 million. That's a lot. So, let's jump into this. We're going to talk about what is a red tide, what are the effects, and what are some ways to solve for this. Let's start. So, red tides are an incredibly toxic algae that overtake our oceans and crush anything in their path. They are made up of this. Red tides are made up from dinoflagellates, which are tiny unicellular organisms that have a skeleton, which is kind of weird for a little organism. But I digress. So when they meet up, when they form in this cluster and they populate like a lot. So they're in these giant concentrated clusters. And when they move in these clusters, they move in the ocean with the waves. That's the way they do it. Now, when they move in the ocean, they move towards light. So they'll move to more sunny areas like California, Gulf of Mexico, Florida, and etc. So when they move, it's actually incredibly damaging because when they move, they produce this incredibly concentrated toxin. Actually, they produce two types of toxins, one that affect humans and one that affect fish. So the first one that affects humans is called a neurotoxin, which essentially attacks a nervous system, whereas a breviotoxin attacks a fish's nerves. Now that we understand what a red tide is, let's examine the cause behind it. So, red tides normally happens because of runoffs from man-made places. So, for example, if you are using a lot of fertilizer at your house and you clean it off and it runs down into the sewer, let's say, and the sewer said leads to the ocean, that's contributing to red tides, believe it or not. So they come from man-made places. So for example, fertilizer from a farm has a lot of nutrients. So when farms use fertilizer to grow their crops and their vegetables, it's actually leading to this runoff which the algae eats. So the algae specifically picks out the phosphates from the fertilizer and consumes that like crazy. They almost become gluttonous when consuming this. When they consume it, they're going to grow more and more and more, and it leads to their energy. And it's just a crazy overproduction of it. And it comes incredibly concentrated, like I previously mentioned. So, when they move in these rivers, they're moving and they lead eventually to the ocean, which is how they get to the ocean. So, now that we understand what a red tide is, let's learn about some of the effects of them. So, what are the effects? Well, some effects on human. They aren't immediate as they are with fish, but they're still attack you in a long-term type of way. So, it's going to cause a lot of problems with the person's respiratory system. It could cause a lot of breathing problems, meaning that you're going to struggle to breathe. You may even choke. It's going to attack someone specifically with asthma. If you have asthma, it's going to hit you in a completely different way and you will not be able to breathe. But in another way that attacks humans is with CNP, formerly known as neurotoxic shellfish poisoning. So when you eat a fish that has been affected by the red tide and it essentially consumes this red tide and you eat it, you're at risk for very bad poisoning, this very bad food poisoning, which eventually, sadly, can lead to some people's deaths. So, now that we know about humans, let's jump into marine life. Marine animals, specifically, experience a harsh interaction with red tide. This algae will enter through their gills and it's essentially an invasion of these marine animals. It's going to enter through their gills and specifically clog them. So it's going to stress out the fish so much that they die, which is crazy. It's also going to poison them and anything they do. So this poisons filter feeding fish, this poisons crustaceans, this poisons your shrimp, anything in the food chain it affects. So when this affects the food chain, it's clearly a big deal because something as small as plankton is being affected, then whales can't eat, and then it's this whole cycle. So what are some effects on the economy? The economy gets hit hard when red tides come in. So, up to $22 million can be lost during this time. Revenue is made from tourist towns. So, these tourist towns, when they see red tides, they know it's going to be a bad day because they can lose up to $6.5 million just alone. Because these towns have restaurants by the beach, have beachfront hotels, people come to see their beach, but people can't get in the water or get anywhere near it because they can be greatly affected. And these fisheries can't serve the fish because the fish are poisoned and it's incredibly dangerous to feed them that. So these towns get hit hard. Now that we've been able to review some of the causes, we can finally discuss a way to solve for red tides. Now, it's not completely hopeless, but there have been some new ways, such as clay mitigation. So essentially, clay mitigation is when you have this slushy type mixture of clay and you hose it over the front, like above the water. And when you hose it, the wet clay will combine with the cells of the red tide, and they'll form this like clump, and when the clay hardens, it's going to sink down, and it's essentially going to kind of suffocate these cells and kill them and take them to the bottom of the floor. So they are no longer active and they are no longer dangerous, and it's pretty safe for the ocean considering a way less alternative than dumping in harsh chemicals in the water, which we know would just greatly affect us more. So, another way to solve is better farming practices. Simply being conscious of your runoff can greatly reduce red tides. Like I previously mentioned, the algae gets its energy from fertilizer. So, by controlling your runoffs for this is incredibly helpful just to reduce this. Now, there is more practices being made for that. There is a program in Saratoga that they're actually implementing for this. So, in conclusion, red tides are becoming more and more apparent. They're taking over our oceans and harming our planet. But don't worry, there's hope. Red tides are composed of this toxic algae that harm our oceans and kill our fish and cost millions of dollars in damage. But there is ways to solve it, such as clay mitigation. Now that we have this awareness and we know what we know now, we can begin to tackle this problem, and it isn't as hopeless. We've actually moved along in 20 years. We have gained so much knowledge about this topic. So, next time you see red in the water, it's probably best to stay away. Thank you.